I've watched people long enough to know that the ones who change our lives rarely announce themselves. They show up looking like trouble or like nothing at all. Just a shape on the road, a problem you didn't ask for. And somehow, that's exactly when everything shifts. The rain came sideways, cold enough to cut. Ethan Cole pulled his collar higher. 8 miles to the cabin. 8 miles of this fool weather. The buckskin stopped dead in the road, ears flat, refusing to move. Something lay ahead, a shape in the brown water pooling between the ruts. He squinted through the downpour. Blue calico, soaked black with mud. A woman, face down. One arm stretched forward like she'd been crawling until her body quit. Her fingers gripped a carpet bag with tarnished brass gripped it even now. Unconscious in the dirt. Ethan swung down. His boots sank to the ankles. He turned her over, and her head lolled back. Lips cracked, face the color of old ash, but her chest rose barely, a breath thin as paper. She was alive. If this story finds you on a quiet evening, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you've been enjoying these tales, subscribing truly helps keep them coming. He kicked the cabin door shut with his boot heel. Water streamed off his slicker, pooling on the plank floor. The woman hung limp in his arms, lighter than she should be. He could feel her ribs through the soaked calico. The cot by the stove. He laid her down, and her head rolled to one side. Her breathing came shallow, quick, like a bird's. Ethan stripped off his gloves. His fingers were stiff from the cold. He knelt by the stove, shoved kindling into the belly, struck a match. The flame caught. He fed it larger pieces until heat began to push back against the chill. Her shoes. He turned back to her. Button boots, the leather cracked and worn through at the soles. He worked the buttons loose, pulled the first shoe off. Stopped. Blisters. Layered on blisters. Some burst and weeping, others swollen tight with fluid. The skin around them rubbed raw, pink, and angry. She hadn't walked a few miles. She'd walked until her feet gave out. He pulled off the second shoe. Worse. A blister on her heel had torn open days ago and never healed. Dirt crusted the edges. The tin basin sat on the shelf. He filled it from the water bucket, set it on the stove to warm, found a clean rag, waited. When the water steamed, he carried the basin to the cot, dipped the rag, wrung it out, pressed it to her forehead. Her skin burned under his fingers. Fever. High. He wiped the mud from her face. Hollowed cheeks. Lines around her eyes that spoke of weeks without rest. A gold band on her left hand, thin and worn, married. Or she had been. Near midnight, she thrashed. Her eyes flew open, not seeing him, not seeing the cabin, seeing something else, someone else. Her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was iron. "Don't let him take it." Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "I signed, I didn't know what I was—" Her eyes rolled back. Her hand went slack. Ethan sat frozen, her fingers still resting against his wrist. The fire popped. Rain hammered the shake roof. She'd said signed. He looked at the carpet bag she'd clutched even while unconscious, now sitting by the door where he'd dropped it. What had she signed and who was coming to take it? Gray light filtered through the oiled paper window. Ethan sat in the chair by the stove, a tin cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He hadn't slept. Every few hours, he'd checked her breathing, changed the cloth on her forehead, fed the fire. The woman stirred. Her eyes opened. Not the wild, fever-blind stare from before. These eyes saw. They swept the ceiling, the walls, the strange man sitting 3 feet away. Her body went rigid. Easy. Ethan set down the cup. You're safe. She pushed herself up on her elbows. Her arms shook with the effort. She swung her legs off the cot, planted her feet on the floor, and tried to stand. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the cot, knuckles white. 2.5 days you were out. Ethan didn't move toward her. Sit. She sat. Not because he told her to, because her body gave her no choice. Where am I? Her voice came out cracked, rusty from disuse. My cabin. 8 miles southeast of Ridgeway. 30-some from Millbrook. Her jaw tightened at the name. Millbrook? She stared at the floor. That's where I walked from. 30 miles. On those feet. Ethan rose and went to the stove. The pot of bone broth had simmered through the night. He ladled some into a tin cup, carried it to her. She looked at the cup, then at him. It's broth. You need to eat something. She took it. Didn't thank him. Didn't refuse. Just wrapped both hands around the dented tin and drank. Her throat moved with each swallow. When she lowered the cup, half the broth was gone. What's your name? He asked. Clara. A pause. Clara Henley. He nodded. Didn't offer his own. She didn't ask. The silence stretched. Outside, a bird called somewhere in the wet trees. The stove ticked as the metal expanded with heat. Clara stared into the broth. When she spoke again, her voice had gone flat, like she was reading from a page, like the words belonged to someone else. My husband was Thomas. He died 8 months ago. Fever took him in 3 days. She took another sip. We had a farm outside Millbrook, 40 acres. Wasn't much, but it was ours. Ethan stayed quiet. 6 weeks after Thomas passed, a man came to the door. Garrett Finch. Her fingers tightened around the cup. He wore a good suit, had papers, said Thomas had debts I didn't know about. Said if I signed, he'd take care of everything. She paused. Her eyes stayed fixed on the broth. I signed, didn't read close enough. Didn't understand what I was putting my name to. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending up a shower of sparks. When I figured out what I'd done, I went to the sheriff, told him Finch had tricked me. Her voice didn't waver, didn't rise. That was worse than if she'd cried. Sheriff said there was nothing illegal about a widow being foolish. Said I'd signed of my own free will. Said the farm belonged to Finch now, fair and square. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced them to relax. You have family, he asked. Someone you could go to, a sister. In Kansas. Haven't had a letter from her in 10 years. Clara lifted her eyes to meet his. I don't know if she's still there. Don't know if she's still alive. No farm, no husband, no family, no one to vouch for her, no one to take her in. So you walked? I walked. She looked down at her feet, at the bandages he'd wrapped around them while she slept. Didn't know where I was going. Just knew I couldn't stay. She finished the broth, set the cup on the floor beside the cot. Her hands settled in her lap, one thumb rubbing the thin gold band on her left finger. I'll leave when I can walk straight. Won't trouble you past that? Ethan took the empty cup, went to the stove, ladled more broth, brought it back and placed it in her hands. Drink that first, then we'll see about the rest. She looked at him. Her eyes searched his face for something, a catch, a condition, the price she'd have to pay. She'd learned to look for those things, learned the hard way. She found nothing. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She drank. Ethan returned to his chair. The morning light was growing stronger, pushing through the oiled paper, casting pale squares on the plank floor. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. The world outside was silent except for water dripping from the eaves. He watched her drink, watched the way she held the cup with both hands, like it might be taken from her, watched the way she sat on the edge of the cot, ready to bolt even though she couldn't stand. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for 5 years. The woman finished the second cup. This time, when she set it down, her hands weren't shaking as badly. "Thank you," she said. The words came out rough, like she wasn't used to saying them, like she'd stopped expecting to have reason to. Ethan nodded. Didn't tell her she was welcome. Didn't tell her she could stay. Didn't tell her anything at all. But when he got up to check the fire, he noticed the carpet bag still sitting by the door. The tarnished brass clasp, the worn leather handles, everything she owned in the world fit inside that bag. He thought about Garrett Finch in his good suit, holding out papers for a widow to sign. He thought about a sheriff who called a woman foolish for trusting the wrong man. He thought about 30 miles of walking on blistered feet, heading nowhere. Because nowhere was better than staying. Clara's eyes had closed. Her breathing had steadied. Not asleep, but resting, gathering what little strength she had left. Ethan looked at the second chair, the one with the wobbly leg he'd never bothered to fix. Hadn't needed 2 chairs in 5 years. He found himself wondering if he still had the tools to repair it. The scraping woke him. Ethan's eyes opened to gray light seeping through the window. Dawn. Barely. The sound came again, straw bristles dragging across wood. He pushed himself up from the chair where he'd fallen asleep. His neck ached from the angle. The cot was empty. Clara stood in the corner by the door, a broom in her hands. The old straw broom, worn down to a nub that he kept meaning to replace. She swept with short, hard strokes, pushing dust and grit toward the threshold. "What are you doing?" She didn't stop. "Sweeping." "You should be resting." "I've rested 3 days." She bent to push a pile of dirt out the door. "That's enough." Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. His beard had grown past stubble into something rougher. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shaved. "You don't have to do that." Clara straightened, looked at him. Her face was still pale, the hollows under her eyes still dark. But something had shifted, a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there when she first woke. "I know," she said. She went back to sweeping. He watched her work. She moved carefully, favoring her feet, but she moved. The broom scratched across the planks in a rhythm: scrape, scrape, push, scrape, scrape, push. Ethan pulled on his boots and went outside to check on the horse. When he came back an hour later, the floor was clean. Not just swept, but scrubbed. Clara knelt by the far wall, a rag in her hand, a bucket of soapy water beside her. The lye soap smell cut through the cabin's usual mustiness. She'd taken the wool blanket off the cot and hung it over the porch rail to air out. His few supplies, the coffee, the flour, the salt, the dried beans, had been reorganized on the shelf, arranged by size. "Found weevils in the flour," she said without looking up. "Sifted them out." Ethan stood in the doorway. He didn't know what to say. The cabin looked different. Not transformed. It was still the same rough-hewn room he'd built with his own hands 7 years ago, but cleaner, cared for. Like someone lived here who intended to stay. He went to the wood pile outside and split logs until his shoulders burned. By midday, she was at the stove. He came through the door with an armload of firewood and stopped. Clara stood with her back to him, stirring something in the cast-iron pot. She'd found the flour sack fabric he kept meaning to throw away and fashioned it into an apron. The ties knotted at the small of her back. The smell hit him. Beans, salt pork, something else underneath cornmeal, browning in the skillet. She didn't turn around, just kept stirring, her shoulders set, her spine straight despite what the walk must have done to her legs. Steam rose from the pot, curling past her face. Ethan stacked the wood by the door. The logs thunked against each other, loud in the quiet room. Still, she didn't turn. He hung his coat on the nail by the door, went to the basin, washed his hands. The water was cold, and he splashed some on the back of his neck. When he straightened, drying his hands on his shirt, she was pulling the skillet off the heat. "Sit down," she said. "It's ready." The table was small, barely big enough for two. He'd built it for two, back when two had mattered. One chair sat where it always had. The other, the one with the wobbly leg she'd pulled out from the corner and set across from it. He sat. She served. Beans ladled into a tin bowl, thick with pork fat. A wedge of cornbread, golden brown and steaming, set on a cracked plate beside it. She sat across from him. Her own bowl. Her own cornbread. She picked up her spoon and waited. Ethan realized she was waiting for him to eat first, to make sure it was all right, to see if he'd accept what she'd made. He took a bite of the cornbread. It was good. Better than good. Crisp on the outside, dense and warm in the middle, with just enough salt. He hadn't tasted cornbread like this since he stopped the thought before it finished. "Cornbread's good," he said. Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes met his across the table. Something flickered there, not quite a smile, but close. The corner of her mouth lifted a fraction. "I know." They ate. The beans were thick, rich with rendered fat, seasoned with something she must have found in his sparse supplies. Pepper, maybe. A bay leaf from the jar he'd forgotten he had. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were spoons scraping bowls, the fire crackling in the stove, the creak of the cabin settling. It wasn't uncomfortable. That was the strange thing. Ethan had spent 5 years eating alone at this table, and he'd thought he preferred it that way. Silence had become a companion, solitude a habit. But this silence was different. It had weight to it. Presence. Clara finished first. She rose, took her bowl to the basin, pumped water over it, started to wash. "Leave it," Ethan said. "You cooked. I'll clean." She hesitated, her hands stilled on the bowl. "All right." She dried her hands on the flour sack apron and went to the cot. Sat on the edge. Her feet, still bandaged. Didn't quite reach the floor. Ethan cleared the table, washed the bowls, The pot, the skillet. The water turned gray with grease. He scrubbed until the cast iron was clean, then rubbed it with a bit of pork fat to season it. Behind him, Clara's breathing had evened out. When he turned, her eyes were closed. Not sleeping, he could tell by the set of her shoulders, but resting. Letting herself be still, he looked at the second chair, the leg that had wobbled for 3 years. Ever since he'd knocked it over in a fit of grief, he didn't like to remember. He'd meant to fix it. Never had. The toolbox sat in the corner. Under a pile of rope and tack he'd stopped bothering to organize. He dug it out, found the wood glue, gone thick but still usable. A clamp. A scrap of wood for a shim. He turned the chair over. The joint had loosened where the leg met the seat. Sloppy work. Originally, he'd built these chairs in a hurry, back when Caroline was pregnant, and he'd wanted everything ready for the baby. He worked the glue into the joint, fitted the shim, clamped it tight. The chair would need to set overnight. He left it upside down by the stove, where the warmth would help the glue cure. When he looked up, Clara's eyes were open. She was watching him. She didn't say anything. Didn't ask why he was fixing a chair that had been broken for years. Didn't need to. He met her gaze, held it. Something passed between them in that look. An understanding too new to have words. Ethan turned away first, went to the door, checked the sky. The clouds had cleared. Tomorrow would be dry. "I need to ride into town in a few days," he said, his back to her. "Supplies running low? Supplies? All right. You'll be fine here alone." A pause. "I'll be fine." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. Stepped outside onto the porch. The evening air was cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. Behind him, through the open door, he heard Clara rise from the cot. Heard her move to the shelf where she'd organized his supplies. Heard the soft clink of jars being shifted. He stood on the porch and watched the last light fade from the sky. The valley spread out below, peaceful in the dusk. For the first time in 5 years, the cabin didn't feel empty. But as the darkness settled in, another thought crept up, unbidden. Ridgeway was 8 miles away. People talked. A woman staying at the coal place, a stranger. Alone with a man who'd kept to himself for half a decade. They would notice. They would ask questions. And Ethan wasn't sure he had answers that would satisfy them. The carpet bag sat unopened in the corner for 7 days. Ethan noticed it each morning, the tarnished brass clasp, the worn leather handles, the way Clara's eyes would drift toward it and then away. She hadn't touched it since the night he'd set it by the door. On the 8th day, she opened it. He was outside, splitting wood. When he heard her through the open window, not crying, Clara didn't cry. At least not where anyone could hear, but a sound like breath catching. A small, wounded noise. He set down the axe, walked to the door, stopped. She sat on the edge of the cot, the carpet bag open beside her. In her hands, she held a small paper packet, yellowed at the edges. Her thumb traced the handwriting on the front. Clara. She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but something in them had cracked open. These were Thomas's. She held up the packet. Marigold seeds. He bought them the spring before he died. Said we'd plant them along the fence line. Make the place look like a real home. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, waited. We never got around to it. Always something else that needed doing first. She turned the packet over in her hands. I grabbed them when I left. Don't know why. Couldn't take anything else. Finch had men watching the house. But these were in my apron pocket from the day before, and I just kept them. The paper was soft with handling. The ink faded. Marigolds, Thomas, Spring 1879. A dead man's handwriting, carried 30 miles in a carpet bag. Could I plant them? Clara's voice was steady, but her fingers trembled on the packet. Somewhere near the cabin, if you don't mind. Ethan pushed off from the doorframe. Come on. He led her around the side of the cabin, to a patch of ground that caught the morning sun. Weeds had taken it over ragweed and thistle, and something with burrs that stuck to his trouser legs. But underneath, the soil was dark. Good soil. Here, he pointed. Gets light most of the day. Drains well when it rains. Clara knelt, pressed her palm flat against the dirt, closed her eyes for a moment. Ethan went to the lean-to where he kept tools, found the hoe, rusted at the blade but still serviceable, grabbed a hand trowel too, and an old bucket. When he came back, Clara was already pulling weeds. Her fingers worked through the soil, ripping out roots, tossing the plants aside. Dirt collected under her nails, smeared across her palms. He handed her the trowel, took up the hoe himself. They worked without speaking. The hoe bit into the earth with a rhythm. Chop, pull, turn. Chop, pull, turn. Clara followed behind, breaking up clods with the trowel, picking out stones and tossing them into the bucket. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered at Ethan's temples, ran down the back of his neck. His shoulders began to burn with the familiar ache of labor. He didn't stop. Clara's dress was streaked with dirt by mid-morning. A smudge of soil marked her cheek where she'd wiped her face. She didn't seem to notice. Her hands moved steadily, turning the earth, preparing it for seeds that had waited 2 years to be planted. Around noon, she sat back on her heels. The patch was clear now, a rectangle of dark, turned soil, maybe 4 feet by 6. Small, but enough. You haven't asked me to explain myself. Her voice came quiet, almost lost in the breeze. Not once. Why I was walking. Why I had nothing. Why I signed those papers. Ethan drove the hoe into the dirt and leaned on the handle. His palms were raw where blisters were forming. Reckon you'd tell me if you wanted to. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not gratitude. Exactly. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for a trap and finally understood there wasn't one. Most people would have asked by now. I'm not most people. She nodded, went back to the soil, went back to the... That was all either of them needed. They planted the seeds in the afternoon. Clara opened the packet carefully, poured the small dark seeds into her palm. They were tiny, barely bigger than flecks of pepper. She placed them one by one into the furrows Ethan had made, spacing them the width of her hand apart. He watched her work. Her face had lost the tight, guarded look she'd worn since she woke up in his cabin. Here, kneeling in the dirt, she looked almost peaceful. When the last seed was planted, she covered them gently, patting the soil down with her palms. Then she sat back and looked at the bare patch of earth. Thomas used to say marigolds mean the sun always comes back. Her voice was soft. I used to think he was just being kind. Ethan didn't answer. Some things didn't need answers. That evening, she found the trunk. He was on the porch, watching the light fade, when he heard her moving inside the cabin. A scrape of wood. The creak of hinges. He knew what she'd found before he turned around. Clara stood by the cedar trunk in the corner, the one he hadn't opened in 5 years. The lid was up. In her hands. She held a shawl. Blue wool, faded now, with small moth holes along one edge. She looked at him through the doorway, didn't speak, just held the shawl and waited. Ethan's throat tightened. He gripped the porch rail. The wood was rough under his fingers, weathered by years of sun and rain. My wife. The words came out rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in too long. Caroline and our daughter, Lily. Clara's hand stilled on the shawl. Fever took them both. 5 years come October. He stared out at the valley. Couldn't look at her. Couldn't look at the shawl. Lily was 3. Caroline was trying to nurse her through it and caught it herself. They died 2 days apart. The silence stretched. A bird called somewhere in the trees. The evening air had turned cool. I'm sorry. Clara's voice was quiet. 2 words. No fuss. No questions about why he lived alone. Why the cabin felt like a tomb. Why he'd let a stranger in when he'd clearly spent years keeping everyone out. Just, I'm sorry. It was enough. Ethan nodded. His eyes burned, but he didn't let himself blink. If he blinked, something might break loose that he'd spent 5 years holding in place. Clara folded the shawl carefully, set it back in the trunk, closed the lid. She came to the doorway, stood beside him on the porch. Not too close, not touching, just present. They watched the sun sink below the ridgeline. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep blue. The first stars appeared, faint and far away. I need to ride into town tomorrow, Ethan said finally. Flowers running low, coffee too. All right. Anything you need, Clara considered. Thread, if they have it, and a needle. I noticed your shirts could use mending. He almost smiled. Almost. I'll see what Howell's got. They stood a while longer as the darkness settled in. The cabin behind them was warm, lit by the glow of the stove through the window. The marigold patch was invisible now, just another shadow in the night. But Ethan knew it was there, knew that beneath the soil, something was waiting to grow. He wondered if Caroline would have minded. A stranger's flowers planted in the dirt outside their cabin. A stranger's hands fixing up the home they'd built together. He thought maybe she wouldn't. Caroline had never been one to hold on to things too tight. She'd have said the cabin needed life in it again. Needed someone to fill the silence. Ethan pushed off from the rail. Early start tomorrow. Best get some sleep. Clara nodded. Went inside. He stayed on the porch a moment longer, looking out at the dark valley. Tomorrow he'd ride to Ridgeway. Face the stares, the questions. The whispered speculation about the woman living at his place. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring what this town thought of him years ago, but as he turned to go inside, a flicker of unease moved through his chest, small, easily ignored, like a cloud passing over the sun. Something was waiting in town. He could feel it the way an old injury ached before a storm. He just didn't know what yet. The road to Ridgeway stretched empty under a pale morning sky. Ethan rode with his collar up against the chill. The buckskin moved at an easy walk, hooves thudding soft on the packed dirt. 8 miles. He'd made this trip 100 times. Knew every bend, every rise, every stand of oak where the shade fell cool even in summer. Today felt different. He couldn't say why. The sky was clear. The air smelled of grass and distant pine. A hawk circled high overhead, riding the thermals. Everything looked the same as it always had. But something had shifted. He felt it in his gut. That low hum of warning he'd learned to trust years ago. Clara had been at the cabin 12 days now. 12 days of meals shared at the small table. 12 days of her moving through the space like she belonged there, mending his shirts, tending the marigold patch, filling the silence with small sounds of living. He'd told her he'd be back by dark. She'd nodded, already elbow-deep in bread dough, flour dusting her forearms. The outskirts of Ridgeway appeared around the last bend, a scatter of houses first, then the livery stable, then the main street with its row of false-fronted buildings, the saloon, the blacksmith, the church with its white steeple, and people. Too many people for a Tuesday morning, standing in clusters, talking with their heads bent close. Ethan slowed the buckskin. The horse's ears swiveled forward, catching sounds he couldn't hear. He tied up at the rail outside Howell's general store. The wooden planks of the boardwalk creaked under his boots. Through the window, he could see figures moving inside more than usual for this hour. The bell above the door jangled as he entered. Conversation stopped. A half-dozen faces turned toward him, then away. The silence lasted 2 heartbeats before the murmuring resumed. Lower now. Words he couldn't quite catch. Howell stood behind the counter, a pencil tucked behind his ear, his apron stained with something dark. His face looked grayer than Ethan remembered. Older. Mr. Cole? Howell's voice was flat. Been a while. Supplies running low? Ethan moved to the counter. Need flour, toffee, coffee, salt, if you've got it. Howell nodded. Didn't move to fetch anything. His eyes flicked past Ethan to the 2 men standing by the pickle barrel. Heard you got company these days? Ethan's jaw tightened. News travels fast. In a town this size, news is about all we got. Howell leaned on the counter. His fingers drummed against the wood. Suppose you heard about our trouble. Can't say I have. Howell's eyebrows rose. 4 nights back, someone broke in through the back window, took the whole cash box, $40, give or take. Ethan kept his face still. That's so. Sheriff thinks it was someone passing through, desperate type. He says. Howell's eyes held Ethan's. Held. The kind of person who might walk 30 miles with nothing but a carpet bag. The words hung in the air. Behind him, Ethan heard the 2 men by the pickle barrel shift their weight. The floorboards groaned. Saw a woman on the East Road few weeks back. The voice belonged to Briggs, the farmer whose land bordered the creek. Ethan didn't turn around. Walking alone? Ain't natural. A woman out there by herself? Carrying a bag? Could have been anyone, said the other man, Miller. From the sound of him. Could have been? Briggs's voice dropped, but not enough to miss. Or could have been somebody running from something. Somebody with reason to be desperate. Ethan's hand closed around the coins in his pocket. The metal edges bit into his palm. The flour. Howell? Howell hesitated. Then he turned and pulled a sack from the shelf behind him, set it on the counter, added a tin of coffee, a smaller sack of salt. Thread? Ethan's voice came out harder than he meant. What color? Doesn't matter. Howell found a spool, brown, sturdy, and placed it beside the other supplies. He named a price. Ethan counted out the coins, laid them on the counter. The door opened behind him. Ethan felt the shift in the room before he heard the voice. Ethan Cole. He turned. Deputy Willis stood in the doorway, his tin star catching the light from the window. He wasn't a big man, but he carried himself like one shoulders squared, chin lifted. His hand rested on his belt, not far from the pistol at his hip. Deputy? Willis stepped inside, let the door swing shut behind him. Heard you came into town. Figured I'd say hello. Hello? Willis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Also heard you've got someone staying out at your place. Woman. They say, stranger. Ethan gathered his supplies, tucked the flour under one arm, the coffee and salt in his other hand. She's not a stranger to me. That right? Willis moved closer. His boots were loud on the wooden floor. Where'd she come from? Ask her yourself. You want to know. I'm asking you. The room had gone quiet. Ethan could feel the weight of every eye on his back. Howell, Briggs, Miller, the woman by the bolt fabric who'd stopped pretending to browse. She came from Millbrook, widowed, lost her farm, walked here looking for work. He met Willis's gaze, held it. That enough for you? Millbrook's 30 miles. I know. Long walk for a woman alone. She knows that too. Willis rocked back on his heels, his thumb hooked into his belt. Funny timing, is all. Woman shows up out of nowhere. Few days later, Howell's place gets robbed. She showed up 12 days ago. Ethan's voice stayed level. Your robbery was 4 nights back. She was at my cabin, 8 miles from here. Hasn't left the property since I brought her in. You can vouch for that. I just did. The silence stretched. Willis's eyes narrowed, calculating something behind them. Then he stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Appreciate you coming in. Ethan, don't be a stranger. Ethan walked past him without answering. The bell jangled again as he pushed through the door. The boardwalk, the hitching rail, the buckskin waiting with patient eyes. He loaded the supplies into his saddlebags. His hands were steady, but something burned in his chest. Anger, maybe, or fear, or both. He mounted, turned the horse toward home. The ride back felt longer than 8 miles. The hills rolled past, golden in the autumn light, but Ethan barely saw them. His mind was back in that store, hearing the words that had been spoken. And the ones that hadn't. They thought Clara was a thief, not just thought suspected. Accused, in everything but the official charge. A stranger who showed up at the wrong time. A woman with no one to vouch for her. No history anyone could check. No proof of anything except her own word. And her word, to this town, was worth less than nothing. The cabin appeared around the last bend. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and white against the blue sky. The buckskin quickened its pace, eager for the feed bucket. Ethan dismounted, tied the horse, stood for a moment, looking at the door. He could smell it before he opened it. Fresh bread, yeast and warmth, and something that shouldn't have felt like home but did. Clara stood at the table, a loaf cooling on a cloth. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hands dusted with flour. She looked up when he entered. Town quiet. His throat tightened. The words he should say about the robbery, about the whispers, about Deputy Willis and his pointed questions sat heavy on his tongue. He set the supplies on the table. The flour, the coffee, the spool of thread she'd asked for. Quiet enough. When Clara's eyes searched his face, she knew he wasn't telling her everything. He could see it in the slight furrow between her brows, the way her hands stilled on the bread. But she didn't press. She just nodded and turned back to the stove. Supper will be ready in an hour. There's coffee left if you want it. Ethan poured himself a cup, stood by the window, looking out at the valley. The marigold patch was just visible from here, the soil dark and waiting. He should tell her. She deserved to know what was being said, what people were thinking. She deserved the chance to defend herself or to leave before things got worse. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. He drank his coffee, watched the light fade, and carried the weight alone. Outside, the shadows lengthened across the yard. Somewhere on the road to Ridgeway, men were still talking, still pointing fingers at a woman they'd never met, blaming her for something she hadn't done. And Ethan knew, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones, that this wasn't over. They would come for her. It was only a matter of time. The hoofbeats came 3 days later. Ethan heard them before he saw the riders, a low rumble that carried through the morning air, growing louder as it climbed the ridge. He set down the axe and wiped his palms on his trousers. 3 men. Deputy Willis in front, his tin star glinting in the pale sun. Howell beside him, sitting stiff in the saddle like a man who didn't ride often. And Briggs bringing up the rear, his face set in that hard expression Ethan remembered from the general store. Clara stood in the doorway, a shirt half mended in her hands. She'd heard them too. Her fingers had gone still on the needle. The riders stopped 20 feet from the porch. Willis dismounted first, his boots raising small clouds of dust. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and looked at the cabin, then at Clara, then at Ethan. Morning. Ethan moved to stand between the men and the porch. Deputy. No need for alarm. Willis held up his hands, palms out. Just here to ask a few questions. Clear some things up. Clara stepped down from the porch. She still held the shirt, the needle trailing thread. You're here about the robbery. Willis tilted his head. Word travels. I see. Ethan told me. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip tightened on the fabric. I didn't take anything from Mr. Howell's store. I've never set foot in Ridgeway. Howell shifted in his saddle. His face was red from the ride, sweat beading at his temples. Ma'am, we're not saying you did. We're just trying to piece together what happened. Then why are you here? Briggs spat into the dirt. Because you showed up out of nowhere right before the robbery. Because nobody knows who you are or where you came from. Because that's how these things work. Clara's chin lifted. I came from Millbrook. I was married to Thomas Henley. We had a farm there until a man named Garrett Finch swindled me out of it after my husband died. I walked 30 miles because I had nowhere else to go. Convenient story. Briggs dismounted, his boots hitting the ground hard. No one to confirm it, though? No family? No friends? No papers? I have papers. Clara's voice cracked, just slightly. The deed transfer? The ones Finch made me sign? They're in my bag? Papers that prove you lost your farm. Briggs stepped closer. Don't prove you didn't break into Howell's place 4 nights ago. Ethan moved forward. She was here? With me. 8 miles from town. So you say? Briggs's eyes were cold. But you've been living like a hermit for 5 years. Cole. Not exactly a pillar of the community. And now suddenly you've got a strange woman under your roof, and money goes missing in town? The words landed like blows. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. Willis stepped between them. One hand raised. Easy, now. Nobody's accusing anybody of anything. We're just asking questions. Sounds like accusations to me. Ethan's voice came out low, rough. Questions. Willis turned to Clara. Ma'am, would you mind showing us what's in that bag of yours, just so we can put this matter to rest? Clara's face drained of color. The shirt slipped from her fingers, falling into the dirt at her feet. She didn't move to pick it up. Go ahead. Her voice was barely a whisper. Look through everything I own. You'll find 3 dresses, all worn through, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, a wedding ring I can't bring myself to take off, and a packet of marigold seeds my dead husband gave me the spring before he died. She turned and walked into the cabin, came back with the carpet bag, set it on the ground at Willis's feet. Open it. Willis glanced at Howell. The shopkeeper nodded. The deputy knelt and unfastened the brass clasp. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside, exactly what Clara had said, faded dresses. A brush with broken bristles. A small bundle of papers tied with string. Willis pulled out the papers, unfolded them. His lips moved as he read. Deed transfer, signed by Clara Henley, witnessed by a Mr. Garrett Finch and Sheriff R. Dawson of Millbrook County. There's your proof. Clara's voice shook now. Proof that I'm a fool who trusted the wrong man. Proof that I signed away everything my husband worked for. Is that what you wanted to see? Briggs reached past Willis and grabbed one of the dresses, shook it out, checked the pockets, found nothing. Dropped it in the dirt. Clara made a sound, not a word. Just a breath pushed out hard, like she'd been struck. Ethan stepped forward. That's enough. We're just being thorough. Briggs grabbed another dress, shook it. The fabric was thin, patched in 3 places. He dropped it beside the first. I said that's enough. Willis stood, holding up his hands again. He's right. We've seen what we came to see. He looked at Clara. I apologize for the intrusion, ma'am. We had to be sure. We had to... Clara didn't answer. She was staring at her dresses lying in the dirt, the dust already settling on the worn fabric. The men mounted their horses. Willis tipped his hat. Howell avoided her eyes. Briggs didn't look back at all. They rode away. The hoofbeats faded. The dust settled. Clara knelt in the dirt. Her hands shook as she picked up the first dress. She tried to brush off the dust, but it had worked into the fibers, leaving gray streaks across the faded blue. Ethan stood frozen. He wanted to help, wanted to say something, but the look on her face stopped him cold. She wasn't crying. It was worse than crying. Her face was blank, emptied out, like someone had reached inside her and scooped out everything that made her Clara. She folded the dress, set it in the bag, picked up the second one, folded it, set it beside the first. Her hands moved mechanically. Fold, set, fold, set. When everything was back in the carpet bag, she closed the lid, fastened the clasp, and stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, her palms pressed flat against the worn leather. Clara. She didn't look up. Ethan walked to her, knelt beside her. The dirt was cold through his trouser knees. Clara, come inside. Everywhere I go. Her voice came out flat, dead. I'm the stranger, the one who doesn't belong, the one they blame when things go missing. That's not, it is. She looked at him then, and her eyes were hollow. In Millbrook, I was the foolish widow who lost her farm. Here, I'm the thief who showed up at the wrong time. Doesn't matter where I go. Doesn't matter what I do. There's always someone ready to point a finger. She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, walked past him into the cabin. Ethan followed, stopped in the doorway. Clara stood by the cot. The carpet bag sat open beside her. She was folding her third dress, the one she'd worn while planting the marigolds. What are you doing? Leaving. She didn't look at him. Before I cost you more than I'm worth, Clara, they'll come back. Her hands kept moving. Fold, smooth, set. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they'll come back. And next time they won't be so polite. Let them come. No. She stopped folding. Her hands gripped the edge of the dress, knuckles white. You've lived here 5 years, minding your own business? I've been here 2 weeks, and already they're at your door. Already they're looking at you different. She was right. Ethan knew she was right. He'd seen the way Briggs looked at him, not just suspicious, but disappointed. Like Ethan had broken some unspoken agreement by letting a stranger into his home. But knowing she was right didn't make him want to let her go. You walk out that door. You're telling them they were right. His voice came out harder than he meant. You're telling them that what they think matters more than what's true. Clara's hand stilled on the dress. She stared down at it, at the small patches she'd sewn to cover the worn spots. And if I stay, what happens then? Ethan didn't have an answer. He didn't know what came next, didn't know if Willis would come back, didn't know if the town would let this go, didn't know anything except that watching her pack that carpet bag felt like watching something die. Stay. The word came out rough. Please. Clara closed her eyes. Her shoulders rose and fell with a long, shuddering breath. She set down the dress, left it unfolded on the cot. But she didn't unpack the bag. And when she looked at him again, something in her eyes had gone dark. If they come back, she said quietly, I won't let them do that again. I won't kneel in the dirt while strangers paw through my things like I'm nothing. You're not nothing. Then prove it. Her voice was steady now, but cold. Because right now, your word is the only thing standing between me and a jail cell. And I don't know how long that's going to last. She turned away, went to the stove, started making coffee, her back straight, her movements sharp. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her. The carpet bag sat half-packed on the cot. The shirt she'd been mending lay forgotten outside. Still in the dirt where she'd dropped it, He thought about Willis and Howell and Briggs, riding back to town with their suspicions intact. He thought about the whispers that would spread, the looks that would follow. He thought about how small this cabin suddenly felt, how thin its walls against a town that had already made up its mind. Clara was right. They would come back. And when they did, words wouldn't be enough. He needed proof. Real proof. Something that would clear her name and shut their mouths for good. The question was, where would he find it? Dawn broke gray and cold. Ethan saddled the buckskin in silence. Clara stood on the porch, arms crossed against the morning chill. She hadn't asked where he was going. She knew. "Don't do anything foolish." Her voice carried across the yard. Ethan cinched the saddle tight. "Never been the foolish type." "Ethan." He looked up. She stood with the light behind her, her face in shadow. The carpet bag still sat by the cot inside, half packed. She hadn't touched it since yesterday, but she hadn't unpacked it either. "I'll be back by dark." He mounted, turned the horse toward the road, didn't look back. The ride to Ridgeway felt shorter than usual. His mind was elsewhere, rehearsing words, discarding them, starting over. He'd never been good with speeches. Caroline used to say he could go a whole week without stringing more than 10 words together. But some things needed saying, even if the saying cost him everything. The town was busier than he'd expected. Wagons lined the main street, horses crowded the hitching rails. People moved toward the town hall at the far end, clustering at the doors, like cattle at a gate. A meeting? Of course. They'd want to discuss the robbery. Point fingers? Make themselves feel like they were doing something about it? Ethan tied the buckskin outside the saloon, walked down the boardwalk. His boots sounded loud against the wooden planks. The town hall was a simple building, whitewashed walls, plank benches, a raised platform at the front where the mayor stood during elections. Today, Deputy Willis occupied that platform, his tin star polished bright. The room was packed. Farmers in work coats, shopkeepers in aprons they hadn't bothered to remove, women in the back rows, shawls pulled tight, whispering behind their hands. Ethan slipped through the door, found a spot against the back wall, crossed his arms, waited. Willis raised his hand for silence. The murmuring died. "We all know why we're here." His voice carried to the rafters. "Howell's store was robbed. $40 taken. That's a lot of money for a town this size." Nods rippled through the crowd. Howell sat in the front row, his face red. His fingers knotted in his lap. "We've been asking questions." Willis paced the platform, hands behind his back. "Looking for answers. And some things have come to light." A woman near Ethan leaned toward her neighbor. "The stranger," she whispered. "The one staying at Cole's place." Briggs stood up from his bench. "We all know who did this. That woman showed up out of nowhere right before the robbery. Came from Millbrook. She says, but nobody can prove it. Nobody knows her. Nobody vouches for her. I vouch for her." The words came out before Ethan realized he was speaking. Every head in the room turned. He pushed off from the wall, walked down the center aisle. His boots were loud in the sudden silence. People shifted aside to let him pass. He stopped in front of the platform, faced the room. "Her name is Clara Henley." His voice didn't waver. "Her husband died 8 months ago. A man named Garrett Finch swindled her out of her farm. She walked 30 miles with nothing but a carpet bag because she had nowhere else to go." Briggs snorted. Pretty story. But stories don't prove anything. I found her face down on the road in the rain. Ethan's hands hung at his sides. He wanted to clench them into fists, but he kept them open. Blisters on her feet so bad she couldn't stand for 3 days. She'd walked until her body gave out. So she says, "So I saw." Ethan turned to face Briggs directly. "I carried her to my cabin. I tended her wounds. I watched her work herself to the bone, trying to repay a kindness I never asked for." The room had gone still. Even Briggs didn't interrupt. 5 years I've kept to myself. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Didn't ask this town for anything. Didn't give much either. But I know what I've seen. That woman worked harder in 2 weeks than most folks do in a month. She mended my shirts. She scrubbed my floors. She planted flowers in dirt that hadn't grown anything but weeds since my wife died. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some faces softened. Others hardened. You want to call her a thief because it's easier than finding the real one. Ethan let the question hang. Fine, but you'll have to call me a liar first. And I've never lied to anyone in this town. Willis cleared his throat. Nobody's calling you a liar, Ethan. We're just trying to find the truth. Then look somewhere else. Ethan's eyes swept the room. Clara was at my cabin the night of the robbery, 8 miles from here. She hasn't left the property since I brought her in. If that's not proof enough for you, then nothing will be. Silence. The kind that presses down, heavy as stone. Then Briggs spoke again. Fine speech, Cole. But speeches don't catch thieves. No. Ethan met his gaze. But hanging the wrong person doesn't either. Movement in his peripheral vision. Someone in the back row. Shifting. Ethan turned his head slightly. A young man sat near the door. Barely 20. With a thin face and hands that wouldn't stay still. Emmett Harlow, the widow Harlow's boy. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The kind that came from nights without sleep. His skin had a grayish cast, like someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. His mother had been sick for months. Ethan remembered. Doctor bills piling up. No father, no brothers, no one to help carry the load. Emmett's face was the color of old ash. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to the platform, then to his hands, twisting in his lap. Ethan filed it away, said nothing. Willis stepped to the edge of the platform. We appreciate you coming in. Ethan, your testimony matters, but we still need to find whoever did this. Then find them. Ethan turned back to face the deputy. But don't destroy an innocent woman's life because you're too lazy to look past the easiest answer. He walked back up the aisle. The crowd parted for him again, but differently now. Some people met his eyes. Others looked away. At the back of the room, Emmett Harlow sat frozen. His hands had stopped moving. His face was slick with sweat. Ethan passed him without slowing. Pushed through the door, stepped out into the morning light. The air was cold and clean after the stuffiness of the hall. He stood on the boardwalk, breathing deep, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. Behind him, the door opened and closed. Footsteps on the wooden planks. Light, hesitant. Mr. Cole, Ethan turned. Emmett Harlow stood 3 feet away, his hat crushed in his hands. His face had gone from ash gray to something worse, greenish, sick. Mr. Cole, The boy's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something." Ethan waited. It wasn't her. Emmett's eyes were wet. His hands shook on the brim of his hat. The robbery. It wasn't the woman. It was... He stopped, looked down at his boots. His whole body trembled. "It was me." The words came out barely louder than a whisper. But Ethan heard them clear as a bell. "Ma's doctor bills." Emmett's voice broke completely. "We couldn't pay. He said he'd stop coming. Said she'd die without the medicine. I didn't know what else to do. I just..." He couldn't finish. His shoulders heaved. A sound came out of him. Not quite a sob. Not quite a gasp. Something worse. The sound of a boy watching himself become someone he never wanted to be. Ethan stood still. Let the boy fall apart. Didn't reach out. Didn't comfort. Just watched. "I was going to let them blame her." Emmett's voice was raw. "I was going to sit there and let them take her away for something I did. Because I was scared. Because I'm a coward." He looked up. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears he'd tried to wipe away. What kind of person does that? What kind of man lets an innocent woman go to jail so he can save his own skin? Ethan thought about Clara, about the dresses in the dirt, about the look on her face when Briggs had pawed through her things like she was nothing. He thought about the boy standing in front of him scared, desperate, guilty. A thief who'd stolen $40 to save his mother's life. The kind of man who still has a chance to make it right. Emmett stared at him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Willis is still inside." Ethan's voice was flat, matter of fact. "You go in there and tell him what you told me. Return what you took. Face what's coming. They'll put me in jail. Maybe, maybe not." Ethan looked toward the town hall door. "Your mother's sick. You did a stupid thing for the right reason. Some people will understand that. And if they don't, then you'll know you did the right thing anyway." Ethan met the boy's eyes. "And that's more than most men can say." Emmett stood frozen for a long moment. The hat in his hands was twisted beyond recognition now, the brim crushed and bent. Then he straightened, took a breath, walked past Ethan toward the town hall door. He paused with his hand on the latch, looked back. "The woman, Mrs. Henley, will you tell her I'm sorry?" Ethan nodded. Emmett pushed open the door, stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him. Ethan stood on the boardwalk, alone. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows down the street. Inside the town hall, he could hear voices Emmett's, thin and shaking, then Willis's, sharp with surprise. It was done. He walked to the saloon, untied the buckskin, and mounted. The horse turned toward home without being asked. 8 miles. Clara was waiting. The carpet bag was still on the cot. He wondered if she'd unpacked it yet. The buckskin knew the way home. Ethan let the reins hang loose, let the horse set its own pace. The valley rolled past in shades of gold and brown, autumn settling deep into the land. A hawk circled overhead, riding the currents. He didn't hurry. There was nothing left to hurry toward, only the telling, and that could wait a few more miles. The cabin appeared around the last bend. Smoke rose from the chimney. Clara stood on the porch, her hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. She watched him dismount, watched him unsaddle the horse and turn it into the small corral, watched him walk toward her, slow and steady, his face giving nothing away. Well, Ethan climbed the porch steps, stood beside her, looking out at the valley. "It wasn't you?" Clara's hand dropped from her eyes. "What? The robbery. They know who did it. It wasn't you." She was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers curled around the porch rail, knuckles going white. "Who told Emmett Harlow?" "The widow's boy." Ethan pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "His mother's sick. Dr. Bill's piling up. He got desperate." Clara closed her eyes. Her shoulders rose and fell with a long breath. "He's just a boy." 19. Old enough to know better. Ethan set his hat on the rail. Old enough to confess when it mattered. "Will they put him in jail?" "Don't know. Willis was still sorting it out when I left." He turned to face her. "But they know it wasn't you. That's what matters." Clara opened her eyes, looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not quite relief, not quite peace, something more complicated, like a door opening onto a room she'd forgotten existed. "Thank you." Her voice was rough. "For what you said in there. For standing up." "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know." She touched his arm, just briefly. Her fingers were cool against his sleeve. "That's why I'm thanking you." They stood together on the porch, watching the afternoon light shift across the hills. Neither spoke. The silence had a different quality now, not empty, not waiting, just quiet. The next morning, hoofbeats on the road. Ethan was splitting wood when the rider appeared. Single horse this time. He set down the axe and waited. Deputy Willis dismounted at the fence line. He held his hat in his hands the way a man does when he's come to apologize. Clara stepped out onto the porch. Her face was guarded, her arms crossed. Willis walked toward her, stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked up at her with something like shame in his eyes. "Mrs. Henley, I came to say I'm sorry." Clara didn't move, didn't speak. "We were wrong about everything." Willis turned his hat in his hands. "The Harlow boy confessed last night, returned most of the money, said he was going to let you take the blame until—" He glanced at Ethan. "Until someone reminded him what kind of man he wanted to be." Clara's arms loosened slightly. "What will happen to him? Judge is coming next week, but given the circumstances, his mother, the medical bills, I expect they'll be lenient. Community service. Maybe. Restitution." "Good." Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "He needs help, not a hanging." Willis nodded, looked at his boots, looked up again. "I know this doesn't make up for what happened. The way we treated you, the things we said." He met her eyes. "But I wanted you to hear it from me. We were wrong. I was wrong." Clara stood silent for a long moment. Then she descended the porch steps, one at a time, until she stood in front of Willis. "I've been the stranger my whole life. Deputy. The one people look at sideways. The one they blame when things go missing." She held his gaze. "You're not the first to point a finger. Won't be the last." Willis's face reddened. "But you came here to say you were wrong. That counts for something." She held out her hand. "Apology accepted." "Apology?" Willis shook her hand. His grip was brief, almost tentative. "If there's anything you need, either of you, the town owes you. We'll manage." Clara released his hand. "But thank you." Willis mounted his horse, tipped his hat, rode back toward Ridgeway without looking back. Ethan watched until the dust settled. Then he picked up the axe and went back to splitting wood. 3 days later, another visitor. This one came on foot, a woman in a faded dress, walking slow, a basket over her arm. She stopped at the fence and stood there, not calling out, just waiting. Clara went to meet her. The woman was older than she'd looked from a distance. Thin, with deep lines around her eyes and a pallor that spoke of long illness. Her hands shook as she lifted the basket. "Mrs. Henley, I'm Margaret Harlow, Emmett's mother." Clara took the basket. Inside, a jar of preserves, a loaf of bread, a small bundle of dried herbs. "You didn't have to bring anything." "Yes, I did." Mrs. Harlow's voice cracked. "My boy almost ruined your life. Almost let you go to jail for something he did. I can't make that right. But I had to try." Clara set the basket on the fence post, looked at the woman in front of her, sick, exhausted, carrying a burden no mother should have to carry. "Your son made a mistake. He was trying to help you. That doesn't excuse—" "No." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "But I know what desperate looks like from the inside. I know what it does to people. Makes them do things they never thought they could." Mrs. Harlow's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "He's not a bad boy. He's just young and scared." Clara reached out, touched the woman's arm. "Don't let this break him. Don't let it break you." Mrs. Harlow nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded and nodded. Tears running down her cheeks. Clara stood with her until the crying stopped. Then she walked her to the road, watched her start back toward town. Ethan came up beside her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He didn't argue. 6 weeks passed. The autumn deepened, and the air turned sharp with the promise of colder days. The leaves fell from the oaks, carpeting the ground in rust and gold. And the marigolds bloomed. Clara saw them first small spots of orange pushing up through the dark soil. She called Ethan over, her voice carrying a note he hadn't heard before. Something lighter, almost hopeful. They knelt together by the patch she'd planted. The flowers were small still, barely open, but their color burned bright against the weathered wood of the cabin. "Thomas always said these would bring the sun back." Clara touched a petal with her fingertip. Her voice was soft. Maybe he was right. Ethan watched her face. The hard lines had softened over the past weeks. She still carried the loss, he could see it, in the way she sometimes paused, staring at nothing, her hand drifting to the thin gold band on her finger. But the emptiness was filling in, slowly, like water seeping into dry ground. Maybe. They stood. The afternoon sun slanted low across the valley, painting everything gold. The cabin cast a long shadow. Somewhere in the trees, a bird sang, "You could stay." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "If you wanted, not on account of owing anything, not to repay some debt, just stay." Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at the marigolds, at the cabin, at the valley stretching out below, peaceful in the fading light. That patch of dirt's going to need tending come spring. Reckon so? Someone should keep an eye on it. Make sure the seeds take proper next year. Reckon so. She turned to face him. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, small, careful, but real. "Then I reckon I'll stay." Ethan nodded. Didn't trust himself to speak. They stood together on the porch as the sun set. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep blue. The first stars appeared, faint and far, no grand promises, no declarations, just two people who'd found something worth keeping, standing side by side in the gathering dark. The marigolds glowed in the last light, small flames of orange against the weathered wood. Clara reached out. Her hand found his on the porch rail. Their fingers touched, barely. Then intertwined, neither pulled away. The night came on, soft and slow, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the silence felt like peace. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this, a heaviness in the chest, perhaps a tenderness we didn't expect, the feeling of standing on a porch at dusk, watching the light fade, not sure what comes next. Many of us have known what it means to be the stranger, to walk into a room and feel the eyes turn toward us, then away. Some of us have carried burdens we couldn't explain to anyone, not because we didn't want to, but because the words wouldn't come. And perhaps you have stood where Ethan stood, wanting to help, not knowing how, afraid that reaching out might cost you something you weren't ready to lose. It's all right if this story stirred something in you that doesn't have a name. Some things aren't meant to be understood. They're just meant to be felt, and then allowed to rest. Not every wound heals completely. Not every silence gets filled. But sometimes, two people find each other in the rain, and that's enough. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.